Hey everyone, welcome back to another live stream and welcome to GDG Doha. We have a very special guest today from Google Cloud Qatar, and we have Omar joining us today from Google Cloud Qatar, and he's going to take us through a complete walkthrough on how to build a two-tier web application and what are the best practices involved in building that. So without further ado, let's bring Omar into the stream. Hi Omar.
Hi, Sachin. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for being part of this show. It's an honor to have you on part of the community. I'm sure a lot of us have a lot of questions and we are eager to learn a lot today as well. So before we actually get started with the session, Omar, I would love to share a bit more about you and your journey so far.
Yeah. So thank you for having me here on the GDG Doha. My name is Omar, of course, Omar Alayhi, and I'm a customer engineer with Google, based out of Doha, Qatar. And my focus is on infrastructure modernization, networking, and security. I joined Google a year ago. Before that, I was working with one of Google's premier partners in the MENA region. I was a senior cloud architect, and yeah, I think that's it about me. Anything else what you want to know about me before I start?
Wonderful. I think we are super excited to have you. And I think the most important thing is when we do a lot of these sessions, and unfortunately, we all know that we were supposed to do this session as an actual physical event, but due to the current conditions, we had to make this virtual. Yeah. And pretty soon, hopefully, if everything clears out, we'll all be seeing you live with our physical events as well.
So hopefully.
And without further delay, I think, Omar, I will hand it over to you and share your screen and take over the show.
Okay, thank you, Sachin. So today, what I will be doing is basically walking you through how to set up a two-tier web application. So the front tier will be like Nginx web server. The back tier will be MySQL database. It's going to be a Cloud SQL MySQL database, meaning it's going to be serverless database as a service offering from Google Cloud. And we're going to put everything behind the load balancer and do some WAF protection as well. So I will guide you through the process, and along the way, I will be describing some of the best practices when deploying such kind of application. So without further ado, let's start. So here's your Google Cloud Platform console. So this is a project that I set up for this event today. So before I start deploying the web server or the Cloud SQL instance, we have to deploy basic networking. A basic network, a VPC. So on Google Cloud, the networking component is called the VPC, or Virtual Private Cloud. And with Google Cloud, as you probably know, the VPC is a global resource, meaning that the one VPC will span all the regions that Google Cloud has, and you can create a subnet in each region within the same VPC. So let's start digging in, creating the VPC, and explaining these concepts as we go along. So if we go to VPC networks, you will see that you have, so for some reason this is, anyway, it's fine. You see that you have a default VPC. This is created, as the name indicates, by default whenever you create a new project. So the default VPC has a CIDR range attached to each region in which Google Cloud is present around the world. So you can see you have a CIDR range for US Central 1, you have a CIDR range for Europe West 1, and so on and so forth. So it's best practice not to use the default VPC network that is created automatically whenever you create a new project, unless you're doing some POCs or testing. So the default VPC is good enough when you're doing some POCs, so proof of concepts, or some testing or some demos. But if you want to go production, it's always better to create your own VPC for several reasons. One of them is manageability, because you have more control over your VPC. You can better manage all the different components within your VPC. And the second reason would be to reduce the attack surface from a security perspective. If you're having subnets that you're not using, or you're not deploying workloads in these subnets, it's better not to have these subnets in the first place. So let's create our VPC. So let's call it GGG Meetup VPC. And so this VPC, like I said, it's a global resource, meaning you can have a subnet in each region within this VPC, and the resources that are deployed in these subnets, wherever they are. So if you have a subnet in US Central 1 and a subnet in Europe West 1, so virtual machines deployed in these two different subnets can talk to each other because they are part of the same VPC. So they can communicate with each other, provided that you have the proper firewall rules set up. But you don't need to do any VPN connections between the subnets, or you don't need to do any peering between the subnets. So since these subnets belong to the same VPC, they will be able to communicate with each other. So let's create two subnets. Let's create a subnet called GDG Meetup, for example, US Central 1. And this one we'll create it in, as the name implies, US Central 1. Let's assign it an IP CIDR range. So it's 1.0/24, 10.0.1.0/24. That's done. Now we can create another subnet. So we can create a subnet called GDG Meetup, so Europe West 1. And this will be in the Europe West 1 region. And the IP CIDR range will be 10.0.2.0/24. So now this is, we're creating a VPC, again, a global resource with two subnets, one subnet in US Central 1 and another subnet in Europe West 1. And before I create, there's here, you can see here, you can notice you have something called equivalent command line. So if you click on that, you will get the Google Cloud Platform will show you the exact command line that you can use to create the VPC and the two subnets. If you want to do it from the Cloud Shell, or if you want to do it from your laptop, if you have your SDK installed, and so on and so forth. So you can see the exact command that you can type in order to create a GDG Meetup VPC, in which project, the type of VPC that you want, which in our case is custom, MTU, etc., and so on and so forth. So this is very helpful if you want to know the exact command to do something. The system will provide you with this information. So let's click create and just give it a minute until we get our VPC set up. So we can do something. We can, in the meantime, try to create a subnet using the command line just for proof of concept. So okay, so now we have. I think it's done. Let's just. Okay, so now as you can see, we have created a VPC, and within this VPC we have two subnets, one in US Central 1 and one in Europe West 1. So let's yeah, this is done. Okay, so now we have two subnets ready for us to start deploying some our web servers. So if you want to deploy a virtual machine on Google Cloud Platform, the virtual machines on Google Cloud are called, compute engines. So if you go to compute engine or compute engine instances to be more precise, so if you go to VM instances, this is where you see the currently deployed virtual machines that you have on Google Cloud inside your project, and you can deploy the new virtual machines from here. So there are several ways to run a web server on Google Cloud. Of course, there's the infrastructure as a service option, which means you can run the Nginx or the Apache web server as a virtual machine on the Google Cloud Platform. You can run the web server as a container, so you can run it as a container on App Engine, for example, or Cloud Run, and so on and so forth. Also, with the infrastructure as a service option, there are several ways of deploying a web server. So I'll quickly be showing you two ways of doing that. So there's the first way is through the marketplace. So if you go to the marketplace, you see that you have several pre-built packages, if you want, of softwares and third-party ISVs or partners. They host their softwares in our marketplace, so we can make use of that. So if we look for the Bitnami Nginx, we can see we have several options. The first option is Nginx, the open source package by Bitnami. So if you click on this offering that you see in the marketplace, you'll get a description of the package, what it contains, the estimated price or the cost per month, and so on and so forth. If we want to launch it, so this will bring up a screen where we can choose a couple of options before deploying the virtual machine on the Google Cloud Platform. Again, this is pre-packaged, so you will get Nginx as part of the package automatically deployed when the virtual machine is installed. So if we name this one Nginx, Nginx, let's deploy it in Europe West 1 because we have two subnets. So if we want to deploy it in Europe, as I said, so we have to choose Europe West. It should be here somewhere. For some reason I cannot see it. Yeah, so Europe West 1, let's say B. And let me choose the cheapest type of virtual machine, which is already automatically chosen. Yeah, the F1 Micro. So this is the cheapest type of machine type that you can choose. This is very good for proof of concepts and testing some basic stuff. I leave everything as default. For the networking, I will choose the VPC that I already created previously, which is the GDG Meetup VPC, and it will automatically select the subnet that I have in the region that I specified above. And I will give this machine an external IP for now, which means that you can automatically connect to the virtual machine. It will have a public IP, and you can connect to it from the internet. Of course, as a best practice, This is not recommended to give to expose virtual machines directly by giving them external IPs. But I'm doing this just for the demo purposes. I will remove it in a bit. I'm just showing you what you can do with the environment. But keep in mind that as a best practice, this is not recommended. And I'll talk about what is recommended in just a bit. So I will remove these as well because I just want to demo something for you. But you can automatically create the firewall rules that will allow the connection to your deployed Nginx web server. I don't want to create the firewall rules automatically. I will create them myself later on. So if everything is okay here, I can choose to deploy, and the deployment manager will start deploying this virtual machine inside my project. So this will take 30 seconds almost. And in the meantime, let me show you another screen. So this is the deployment manager. Again, this is deploying the Nginx package that is available in the marketplace. And here, if you go to the compute engine, the VM instances, you will see that this VM has already been deployed. Yeah, so this needs a refresh, but it has already been deployed. So this is one way of deploying an Nginx web server. So you see here that the web server has an external public IP. So it means that I can connect to this external public IP and access the default page of the Nginx web server. Of course, now I'm trying to connect to this web server, and for some reason the default page is not coming up. And you know it's not coming up because I didn't configure the firewall rules. I chose not to automatically create the firewall rules that will allow traffic on port 80 coming to the Nginx instance. This is why I'm not able to connect. Let's assume that for some reason you don't know where the problem lies. So we have something in Google Cloud called network intelligence. So if you go to network intelligence, you have several components. The component of interest for this demo is the connectivity test. So I can do some basic troubleshooting and connectivity test to see where the problem is. So if I want to create a connectivity test, I want to name it Nginx connectivity. I want to, the source IP is, my source IP, let me refresh just to make sure that my source IP has not changed. Yeah, should be fine. So this is my IP. This is the source IP, and I want this to test this the traffic coming from this IP to the IP of the public IP of the web server that I have already deployed. So I want to test traffic coming from my machine now, which is it could be any IP, to be honest, not only my machine, but I'm just using it for demo purposes. And I want to test traffic going to port 80. So no. If everything is fine, so I click create. And now the platform will run this connectivity test to see if the Nginx server is reachable. And of course, it is not reachable, because if I check, I can see that the ingress firewall rule, I have a problem with the ingress firewall rule because it is denied. And it is denied by a rule that has the priority of 65535, which is an implicit rule that is applied, automatically in the list of firewall rules. So this rule has the lowest priority. If you have no firewall rules created, you have two implicit rules on Google Cloud Platform. And these two implicit rules are deny every ingress, everything coming in, so ingress traffic, and allow egress traffic, so everything coming out. So to fix this, if I go to the VPC network and I go to the firewall section, I can create a firewall rule. So I want to create a firewall rule for my GDG meetup VPC, and I want to allow HTTP. Now, one thing I didn't do, and I will explain something before I can do this. So this firewall rule will apply to which network? I have to choose the network that I want this firewall rule to apply to. In my case, it's the GDG Meetup VPC that I created when I started this demo. And I have to choose the direction of the traffic, meaning I have to choose if this firewall rule will apply to traffic coming into the VPC or coming out of the VPC. In my case, I want to allow ingress traffic coming in the VPC and specifically to the target, to the Nginx web server that I just deployed. I want to allow it, of course. And when I select the targets, so there are two ways of selecting, or there are three ways of selecting targets in the firewall rule. One way, which is not the recommended way, it's not the best practice, using tags. So what do I mean by tags? We can tag virtual machines with a label, with a certain word. For example, I can tag the virtual machine as web. So the firewall rule, I will tell the firewall rule that all the machines that are tagged with web, I want to allow traffic coming to port 8. This way, if I create another web server in my project, instead of creating another firewall rule, I can simply tag the new web server with the same tag, which is web, and the firewall rule will automatically apply to the new server. Of course, I did not create a tag for the machine that I created, so I will go and do that after I create the firewall rule. And when I specify the source, since this is a web server, I want to allow traffic from all sources. So I simply choose 0.0.0.0/0. This means that allow, any source. And I want to specify the protocol, specifically it's port 80 TCP, so I just specify this one. Again, if you look here, you see the equivalent command line. This will give you the equivalent command line or the equivalent command that you can use to create this using Cloud Shell or the Cloud SDK if you have it installed on your machine. So if I click create, this should create a firewall rule for us that would allow traffic on port 80 coming into the web server that I just created. I just need to make sure that this web server is tagged with the right tag in order for the firewall rule to apply to that web server. So if I go to the server, I click edit, and yeah, just give it a second. Yeah, so if I look for the, just a second. So if you see here network tags, of course, when you deployment manager automatically will tag this, but the tag is really, you cannot memorize it, and it's very complicated. So I will use a simpler tag, which is web. And once I save this one, hopefully within seconds we should start seeing the traffic on. Yeah. So now you can access the web server, and as you can see, this is the Bitnami Nginx package that we deployed from the marketplace. Again, best practices is not to give a public IP to expose the virtual machines that are on your cloud platform to Google Cloud Platform to the outside world using a public IP, but I will remove that in a second. Before I do that, let me mention the second way of specifying targets in the firewall, which is the recommended way. So as a best practice, tags are not a best practice. And the reason is the tags are not the best practice because they can they can easily be modified by whoever has access to the project. So I can tag an SQL machine with the tag web, and then all traffic going to this machine on port 80 will be allowed automatically. So this is not a best practice. Again, we do this for POCs and demos because it makes life a little bit easier. But when I want to specify targets, when I'm creating my firewall rule, the recommended way or the most secure way is to use service accounts. So service accounts, I think we are all familiar with service accounts in one way or another. So if you used Windows for some time, you will know that you have services running all the time on Windows, and these services, you can have applications run as a service, for example, or you create service accounts in Active Directory, or accounts that you use to run certain services. So in Active Directory, you might have an application, and you create an account in Active Directory for this application. And whenever this application is running, it will be using this account to run as a service. It's the same concept, similarly here. So resources in GCP, they run as a service account, meaning that take the example of the virtual machine. So the virtual machine has a service account attached to it, because the virtual machine, when it wants to interact with different services on Google Cloud Platform, for example, if the virtual machine wants to access GCS bucket, it needs to authenticate to the GCS bucket APIs. So the virtual machine will have a default service account that it's using in order to interact with the different APIs. So what you can do, so there is a default service account created for virtual machines on Google Cloud Platform, but you can create your own service accounts. So you can create a service account for web servers. And this service account, you can assign to it roles and permissions. So you would restrict this service account from accessing certain APIs. You would create the firewall rules with this service account in mind, and so on and so forth. You can create another service account to run virtual machines that are hosting MySQL instances, for example. You can, again, etc., and so on and so forth. So the recommended way, the best practice, is to have a service account, and you configure your firewall rules with the service account as a target. For this demo, I don't have a service account set up, but I'm just mentioning it as a best practice. We will continue with the tags that we just did a minute ago. But keep in mind that this is not the recommended way, and it's the best practice is to actually use service accounts. So let me quickly create another rule because now we can SSH to the virtual machines, but in order to SSH to the virtual machines, we have to create as well an SSH allow. Again, it's on the same VPC. I want to access the web servers, and I want to access, I will give access from anyone, and I will choose the TCP to be port 22. So if I create this firewall rule, I can now go back to the VM instances, and you can see here the SSH button. So when you create the SSH, you can actually access the command shell of this virtual machine. So quickly, another way of deploying this, I will show you how to deploy the Nginx manually. So I will create an instance Nginx in US Central 1. I will create it in US Central 1, as I said. Let's keep it at C. N1, this is the cheapest machine, the F1 Micro. I want to leave everything else as default. The only things that I want to change are the networking, because I want to specify a tag, which is web, and I want to change the default network to the VPC network that I created at the beginning of this session. Let's leave the public IP for now, or actually let's remove this. Let's remove the public IP. This one, it's the external IP. Sorry. So let's remove it. So this machine will not have a public IP. So if I install a web server, actually I cannot install a web server in the first place, because in order to do that, I need to be able to run the apt-get command, and I cannot do that because the machine doesn't have a public IP. So the machine cannot access the internet. So how can we actually install this Nginx on this machine? So Google Cloud has something called Cloudnat, and the idea of Cloudnat is to allow virtual machines that don't have external IPs, external public IPs, to access the internet in order to fetch updates, for example. But this is not the NAT that you are familiar with when you are dealing with network devices, on-prem network devices, or firewalls like the Cisco ASA, for example, or whatever. In the sense that this NAT is not exposing the internal machines, the internal virtual machines, to the public. It's only allowing these machines to access the internet in order to fetch updates, but anyone from the outside will not be able to connect to these machines. So while this machine is installing, which should be done by now actually, because virtual machines on Google Cloud take around 30 seconds to deploy, I can configure a Cloudnet. So let me do that quickly. So let's call this one. So GDG meetup. So I'm using GDG meetup a lot, but anyway, so let us NAT. So I have to attach a cloud router for this one, a network. I mean, so the network is the GDG meetup VPC. The region is US Central 1 in my case, and I need to have a router attached. I don't have a router right now, so I will create a new one. So meetup router, and I don't need to specify anything else. I just need to specify the name, and I leave everything else as default. So now, what I did in this in the Cloudnet option here, what I did is that I created a cloud router that would allow and the Cloudnet services service attached to that would allow my virtual machines to access the internet without having a public IP. This way, I can access the virtual machine, fetch some updates, install new software without exposing the machine to the public internet. And again, this is definitely one of the best practices. It's definitely recommended not to publish these machines to the internet and have these machines deployed behind the Cloudnet. So this is the machine that doesn't have a public IP, which is US Central 1. So I can SSH to it, even though it doesn't have a public IP, because on Google Cloud, we have something called Identity Aware Proxy, IAP. But this is a topic for some other session. We'll discuss IAP whenever we have a session about security and stuff like that. But for now, let me see if the Cloudnet is up and running. If it is, I should be able to Nginx and crossed. Yeah. So now this machine is accessing the internet without having a public IP because of the Cloudnet that has been deployed. So all traffic is being routed to through the Cloudnet. So the Nginx is running, should be active. Yes. So I have Nginx installed. but I don't have a way of accessing this web server because this web server doesn't have a public IP. So, and it's recommended not to have a public IP. So, how do I fix this? So the best practice is to have your web applications and your web servers behind a load balancer. So now we have 6 types of load balancers in Google Cloud. One of the most common and famous one, if you want, is the HTTPS load balancer. The HTTPS load balancer has many features, including inbuilt protection for DDoS attacks, so distributed denial of service attacks. So this HTTPS load balancer will protect your backend from any denial of service attacks. Also, the HTTPS load balancer, one of the main features of the HTTPS load balancer is that it is a global load balancer. What do I mean by that? First, let me go to network services, load balancing. Yeah. What I mean by a global, it's a global load balancer, meaning that the load balancer can have backends, and by backends I mean the web servers. If in this case, you can have web servers deployed in different regions throughout the world. So the load balancer can serve backends deployed in US and can serve backends deployed in Europe, for example. The load balancer will route traffic to the nearest backend according to the user's location. So this is why I'm saying it's a global load balancer. And if I'm accessing, for example, a resource here from Qatar, the closest region probably for me is Europe. So the load balancer will actually route my request to the backend in Europe because it's the closest one to my location. Unless the backend in Europe is heavily utilized, then it will route the traffic to the US in case the US is less utilized and has more capacity. So let me quickly, and the other thing that you can do with the HTTPS load balancer is that you can attach a Cloud Armor. Cloud Armor is a service that we offer at Google Cloud for as a web application firewall. So our WAF solution is called Cloud Armor, and I will be deploying Cloud Armor if I have time. Hopefully, I do. And I will show you how to create some basic rules to blacklist certain IPs, for example. But with the Cloud Armor, you can do several things. You can get protection for SQL injection, cross-site scripting. Even Cloud Armor has some now has rules to protect against the Log4j vulnerability that was discovered a couple of months ago. So if we choose, like I said, we have 6 load balancers to choose from. I will choose the HTTPS load balancer, and of course I want to have this load balancer deployed as internet facing, meaning the traffic will be coming from the internet and routed to my web servers as the backend. And of course it's a classic HTTPS load balancer. Let's leave it at that for now because the other one with advanced traffic management is still in preview, but just keep in mind that a new version is coming out soon. So the GDG meetup load balancer, I have this is the name of my load balancer, and for me I have to create now the backend, and the backend is I missed a step. I'm sorry for that. In order to create a backend, I need to create an instance group. So the instance group is just as the name implies, it's a group of instances. In my case, it's a group of web servers. There are 2 types of instance groups. You will see 3 now on your screen, but mainly the 2 main categories are actually 3. Are actually 2. There's the managed instance group and the unmanaged instance group. And if the difference between both is with the managed instance group, you can create a group that can auto scale depending on the traffic that is coming to your website. So you create a template for a web server with the necessary startup scripts in case the group creates instances automatically. And you create by default, for example, 2 servers. Whenever the traffic increases, if you have an e-commerce website and it's Black Friday, and suddenly you find that you're getting 1 million requests per second, so the managed instance group will automatically scale out, meaning it will create additional instances to be able to handle the surge in requests. Once the traffic goes back to normal, the managed instance group will automatically scale out, meaning it will go back to the initial number of nodes that it started with. So in this case, for example, it's 2. With the unmanaged instance group, it doesn't have auto scaling. So with the unmanaged instance group, we will create a group just to be able to use it as a backend, and we will add the virtual machine that I just created, specifically the US Central one. And we will then proceed with creating the load balancer and giving our users all over the world access to the web servers, to the web server that is deployed in US Central one. So let me create an Nginx unmanaged instance group, and this is sorry, I have to choose unmanaged instance group, and in my case I will create it in US Central 1. The network is the VPC that I created, sub network is US Central 1. And now I want to select the VM. Of course, it will show me the only VM that I have deployed in US Central 1, which is the machine that doesn't have a public IP in this case. So if I select this one, and let's create the unmanaged instance group. So now I have an unmanaged instance group. Now this unmanaged instance group has only one instance. In this case, it's the Nginx web server, but I can have 2, 3, 10 instances. I can go for managed instance group, like I said, to have some sort of auto scaling, especially in e-commerce websites around Black Friday or Cyber Monday, and so on and so forth. So yeah, once this is created, I can go back to my HTTPS load balancer, and I want to create a backend service. In this case, I will just name this as GGG Meetup Load Balancer Backend. And of course, I'm going to choose HTTP and port 80. You can choose, of course, HTTPS, and you can create a certificate from the Google Cloud Platform, an SSL certificate, or you can upload a certificate if you already have one for your website. The instance group is, for some reason, okay, just a second, let me cancel, because I created this after I created the instance after I started creating the load balancer. So let's create a new load balancer. So this is the GDG Meetup load balancer, create the backend service, up load balancer backend. The instance group is the for some reason, what am I doing wrong? I'm doing something wrong. Wait a second. This is the unmanaged instance group. It's US Central 1. Yeah. Did I choose the wrong region? It's an instance group. Should be. Okay, let me refresh just a second. Sometimes it takes a while to refresh. Of course, after I create the load balancer, still have several things to create, a couple of things to create. Will not work automatically because there's one thing that I need. Yeah, this is it. So, like I said, GDG meetup LB backend. So yeah, sometimes you need to refresh because I had two windows open. So this could happen sometimes. It's fine. Port 80 is definitely the case for us. It's an instance group. It's the Nginx unmanaged instance group that I created, and I assigned to it the Nginx virtual machine that I created earlier. Of course, there are several options that you can choose from: session affinity, utilization, for example, the balancing mode. For example, you can choose the type of balancing mode that you want. If you want a balancing mode based on utilization or rate. Anyway, you can, of course, also enable CDN, which is the content delivery network. This will allow, of course, faster performance because it will push some static content closer to the end user, and it will improve the performance and the response rate. And we have to create a health check. The health check, the idea of the health check is that the load balancer will continuously probe the backend, the instances that are deployed in the backend, to make sure that these instances are healthy. If the instances are not healthy, the load balancer will not forward the traffic to the instances. And in the case of a managed instance group, if the instance is not healthy, it will be replaced by another instance. So it will be deleted and a new one will be created. So the idea is to have healthy instances all the time that are accepting traffic in order not to lose any traffic. So in our case, it's just I'll check. And I don't need to change anything else. I'll keep everything as default. So this is the back end. I choose this back end. If I go to the front end, I just need to create now the IP address. So we need a static IP address. This is the IP address of the load balancer, and this IP address will be exposed to the public internet. This is the one that you will use to update your DNS servers, for example, if you are publishing your website. And one thing I want to talk about connection termination. I will do that once I finish LBIP. I want to reserve a public IP and attach it to the load balancer. And if everything goes well, so this is the front end. It accepts connection at HTTP port 80, and it will forward it to the backend on as well on port 80 using protocol HTTP. Again, you can have HTTP. You can use HTTPS. You can create the certificate inside the Google Cloud Platform. You can bring your own certificate if you have a certificate already in place for your website. You can do HTTPS to HTTP redirection. If you want to direct traffic from the HTTPS, which you have exposed publicly, to the backend, which could be running only on, you could be only running on HTTP. All these are possible. So let's do this. Create. So now we're creating this load balancer. It will take just a minute or two to come up, and then we will proceed. One thing we didn't do. Okay, so the difference between stateful and stateless managed instance groups is that with stateful, the managed group is mindful of the traffic that is being forwarded to the instances. So if an instance is found unhealthy, the managed instance group will have to replace this. In the stateless managed instance group, so the instance will be replaced without taking into consideration the traffic that was coming to this instance, the IP it used to have, or the session, stuff like that. So you could actually, because of this, some connections could be dropped. The idea of a stateful managed instance group is to restore a new healthy instance, instead of the one that is not healthy. So you delete that one, but the new one that you create will be, in a sense, similar to the one that was deleted, in order to preserve the connection or connections that the previous instances had, in order not to drop any connections. I hope I answered your question. So as you can see, now we have, this is created. This is the load balancer. It has been created, and it has this public IP that has been assigned to it, and we have a healthy backend. We have 1 out of 1 are healthy, which is expected. One thing that you need to keep in mind is you need to create a firewall rule. When you create the load balancer, you need to create a firewall rule that will allow traffic from the load balancer public IPs to the backend instances. Why is this the case? Because these load balancers are actually reverse proxies, in the sense that they don't preserve the IP of the client in the source IP of the packet. What these reverse proxies will do is that they will preserve, so HTTPS load balancer will preserve the public IP, the IP of the client, the source IP, but using the X forwarder headers, using the headers. So for the backend instances, the source IP is actually the IP of the load balancer. So you need to create a rule that will allow these IPs, the IPs of the load balancer, to talk to the instances, to the Nginx instances on port 80. So GGG meetup. I want to allow. Allow health check. So this is not only allowing traffic on port 80, but it's also allowing the health check to function properly. Because how does the load balancer check for the health of the instances? It will try to connect 2 or 3 times to port 80 of the instance. If you get 2 or 3 consecutive failures, the load balancer will decide that this instance is unhealthy. If you get 2 consecutive replies, then this instance is healthy, for example. So if there is no firewall rule that would allow this connection, the load balancer would deduce that the instances are not healthy, and therefore will not forward the traffic to our Nginx servers. So we need to create this rule to make sure that the load balancer does not confuse our healthy instances and confuse them with unhealthy ones. And there are specific IP ranges for the public IP of the load balancers. I already have these saved here. So it's 130.211.0.0 /22, and you have the 35.191.0.0.16. These are available on the public documentation. So if you go to the Google documentation, you will see these IP specified and how to create this rule in case you're creating a public, a global HTTPS load balancer. So I will select specified ports and protocols and select TCP, create. So once we have this firewall created, and hoping that I didn't miss anything while creating the load balancer, the backend and the front end, we should be able to we should be able to access now our website. We should be able to access the Nginx that is deployed in the Compute Engine instance that doesn't have a public IP. So if we go to the load balancers, this is the unmanaged instance group. So if we go to, because I want to get the public IP, okay, sorry. Okay, load balance. The easier way is to do this. Search for whatever you want. The menu is not responding. And yeah, so let me get the public IP and see if we can access the web server. So yeah, so now I have two web servers deployed. One was I deployed it using the Bitnami package, the pre-package that is available in the marketplace, and the other one I deployed a virtual machine and I installed the Nginx manually. And this one doesn't have a public IP, so I gave access to this web server through the load balancer that I created. And now, as you can see, I have access to this machine using the load balancer. Now, there are two more things remaining, and I hope I can finish this quickly. So if you can bear with me for another 10 minutes. So we have web servers, but we don't have an SQL backend. So we don't have a database. What we can do, so this is one thing, the backend, the database backend, and I want to create the Cloud Armor service that I talked to you about to protect my website against SQL injections, cross-site scripting, and so on and so forth. So I will start with the Cloud SQL because this will take a little bit of time, and then I'll go back to Cloud Armor. So Cloud SQL is the managed service that is provided by Google. It's the database as a service, or it's the serverless database service if you want. So the idea is that you get a MySQL or Postgres or even Microsoft SQL as a service. It's serverless or it's managed, meaning that you don't need to deploy an infrastructure machine, a virtual machine, in order to install, MySQL, for example. You just get the MySQL database without worrying about the underlying, operating system and virtual machines, etc., and so on and so forth. So you have three options with the Cloud SQL. You have the MySQL, you have the Postgres, and you have the Microsoft, SQL Server. This is the Linux version of the Microsoft SQL Server. So if anyone is considering, migrating a Microsoft SQL Server to a Cloud SQL managed service, you can do this under certain conditions, and the conditions are there are lots of conditions. I will just mention one. As long as the client is not using any advanced services like SSRS, which is the it's the services service reporting. You can migrate the Microsoft Cloud SQL to the Microsoft SQL to Cloud SQL. It's not available for Oracle. So Oracle on Google Cloud has a different solution. We call it BMS or bare metal services. So if I want to create a MySQL database, the recommended best practices here is not to give access to this database or expose it to using a public IP, because you can do that. So if I just jump ahead, you can specify, where is it? Sorry. Connections. You can specify a public IP to this database, and you can specify authorized networks. For example, if you have a fixed public IP in your organization and you want to access the database only from this public IP, you can do that. So you can specify this as an authorized network, and only this IP can access the MySQL instance. But it's not recommended. The recommended thing is to use a private IP, and I will explain a little bit about this once I just finish the setup, the setting up the different attributes. So what I want is I want to have this database as an Nginx master. The reason I'm calling it master is because you can have read replicas. So you can have the master node, which is the one that accepts read and write requests. And for distributing the requests coming to this database, if you have lots of read requests, you can create read replicas to offload some the read requests from the master node and keep this one for write requests, for example. So I can generate a complex password. I can type a password. I will do this. I will just type the most secure password in the world, which is password 123. This is just this is not the best practice, and it's not recommended. But just to make things simple, actually, let me type it again just in case. So with Cloud SQL, you can deploy it in multiple zones for high availability. For this purpose, I will deploy it in a single zone. I will choose the cheapest machine, the lightweight machine. I will keep the storage at 10 gigabits because this is just for demo. And here, when it comes to the connection, again, I'm not going to use the public IP because it's not recommended. So you use a private IP to connect to the Cloud SQL instance. And what this does is this will create, so you want to associate this with a network. Our network or our VPC is the GDG Meetup VPC. We have to create a peering between the GDG Meetup VPC and a private service VPC on which this Cloud SQL will be deployed. So I have to set up a private service access, and this private service access I have to specify an IP address for this private service range. In my case, I'm going to select the. So where is it? Yeah. So this is the cloud or MySQL, for example, whatever you want, private service access, and the IP that I want to allocate is 10.0.3.0/24. So this CIDR range will be used when deploying the Cloud SQL instance, and this VPC, this private, if you want, VPC, will be peered automatically with my the VPC that I have created when I started this demo. This will allow my web servers, the Nginx web servers, to communicate with this SQL privately using the private IP or the internal IP without exposing the IP to the external world. So this will just creating the Cloud SQL instance will take 5 minutes. So this will take some time. We will click create now, and then we will proceed with the Cloud Run. Yeah, again, Cloud SQL is not available for Oracle. So if you want to run Oracle on Google Cloud, we have a solution for that called BMS or Bare Metal Service. But Cloud SQL is only the versions of Cloud SQL that are available are MySQL, Postgres, and Microsoft SQL Server, the Linux version. So as far as I know, regarding the GCP region in the UAE, as far as I know, there are no plans. But I don't know I don't know 100% for sure, to be honest. As far as I know, there's no plan to have something in UAE. The data center in Qatar is coming mid this year, hopefully, and there's the announcement that was made last year that a data center will also be available in Saudi Arabia. So now we have selected all the options. Of course, we have several options to select from as well. we have backup options, maintenance options. We can specify certain flags before creating the machine, the Cloud SQL instance. But for now, I'm not going to do that because we don't want to complicate the scenario a lot. So I'm creating the instance now, and I'm sorry, and while it's creating, because it will take 5 minutes, I can go back to my load balancer. I'll create a Cloud Armor service, attach it to the load balancer in order to protect my website or my web servers from security attacks. So if I select Cloud Armor, so Cloud Armor is our WAF offering, as I said, Web Application Firewall. So let's click create policy. So I want to create an Nginx WAF policy. So this, I want to use this policy to attach it to my load balancer and protect my Nginx web servers that are deployed in the backend. So I'm just quickly going to skip these, and I will show you why later on. Add target, so I attach it to my load balancer. I only have one. Keep in mind that Cloud Armor is only configurable with the HTTPS global load balancer, which has built-in also. All of our load balancers, they have protection against DDoS, but the HTTPS load balancer is unique in the sense that it has DDoS protection built in. It's global in nature. It uses anycast IPs, where you can access the load balancer from anywhere in the world through the Google network, through the closest point of presence to your traffic source. You can also distribute traffic across backends in Europe, US, and Asia. So in this sense, yeah, it is a unique load balancer. So let's create this policy. So now we created the policy, and this policy has no rules in it, except maybe for one default rule, which is deny all. Of course, we don't want to deny everything. So yeah, this is deny all IP addresses or IP ranges, and this has the very, 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 very high low priority. Of course, this is not what we want. I want to deny traffic to my IP address. So this is my IP again. Let me just check that my IP. Of course, it hasn't changed, but I'm paranoid like that. So if we specify my IP address, which is, let's say you notice that your website is getting a lot of traffic from suspicious traffic from a specific IP address, so you can block this IP address at the source. You can block it at the load balancer before even it reaches your web server. So you can deny this. Of course, there's the option of previewing the rule. What does this mean? What this means is that you can preview the rule without enabling it. So it will not block the traffic, but it will give you the indication that, okay, we have this traffic and this rule applies to this traffic. So the traffic should have been blocked. So this way we can test rules before we enable them. So we monitor the behavior of the rules for some time, just to make sure we don't have a lot of false positives, for example. And once we're satisfied with the performance of the rule, we can enable the rule. Of course, in this rule, I'm just blocking an IP address, and it's my IP address. But the idea, you can write some rules to look for some SQL injections, to look for cross-site scripting, to block the Log4j attack attempts. There are some documentations that are available online on this, on how to write rules for Cloud Armor. If I have time, I will look for something up. I forgot to prepare these beforehand, and I can share these with you once we are done with this one. So the priority. So let me give it a higher priority than the default one. So actually, let me delete the default one as well. Let me see. So no, I think it's by default. I cannot. Yeah, I cannot delete this one. So now that we have this rule applies, it blocks my IP address. So theoretically, everyone else should be able to access this website except me. I think the default rule we can override it somehow. Let me not this one. Let me double check. But anyway, the idea is now my traffic should, because of the Nginx, if I give it time to propagate the configuration, I shouldn't be able to access the web page anymore because of the WAF that I have deployed, and this WAF is blocking the traffic from getting to the Nginx server. But it needs a couple of minutes just to be enabled. Let me go back to my SQL instance. It's still being created. So as you can see, now I have a private IP that has appeared. This private IP is the IP that I can use to connect to this MySQL instance. Now I can go to my web server and create, the connection strings in my PHP scripts, or if I have cPanel installed, or so on and so forth. I can use this IP to connect my web servers to the Cloud SQL instance. And once this is done, this is exactly what we will do. So if I go back to this machine, which is the one that is behind the load balancer, yeah, it's the one in US Central one. So this now has done. This is done. I mean, the task has finished, and now I have a MySQL instance created. So what I can do now is that, of course, I have the MySQL client, which is not installed on the system. Shouldn't not be. Yeah. So I just need to install it. I think it's the let's see, it's the MariaDB client, right? What is it called? MariaDB client. So once I install the MySQL client, I can connect to my backend. So MySQL, I have the user, which is root. I have the host, which is the 10.0.3.3. This is the private IP of the MySQL instance. And of course, I want to specify a password. And my password was password123. And now I'm accessing the Cloud SQL instance that is deployed on the Google Cloud Platform. So if I show databases, of course, there are no databases created except the system ones that are created by default. I can create a database. Let's say I want to call it GDG Meetup Attendees. I want to collect, for example, the names of everybody who has attended. And yeah, so again, if I type show databases, I have one database which is now called GDG Meet Attendees. I called it Meet. I wanted to call it Meetup. Anyway, so let me use the GDG Meet Attendees. And of course, there are no tables created. So if I write show tables, there are no tables. So I can create a table. I can create a table, and this table, it will be creating it in we will call it GDG. So attendees. I use the GDG Meet attendees method. GDG attendees. I hope I'm writing properly because I cannot tell if I'm doing any mistakes in spelling. So forgive me for that. So like I want the first name. This is so 255, and I want the last name. This is also a varchar 255. This should work. I did not select the database. So yeah, sorry. So use GDG and this. I up GDG. Show tables. Database. Okay. Attendees. See, I told you I'm doing some spelling mistakes. So let's start over. So I want to use the GDG Meet attend-ESS, which is definitely a spelling mistake. But anyway, I'm typing fast and I did not notice. So yeah, so now I'm using this table, and once I use this table, I'm using this database. So if I show tables, I don't have any tables created in this database. So if I go back to creating my first table, which should be this one, it should work. Yes. So now if I have show tables, and now I have a table called GDG attendees in a database called GDG meet attendees. Apologies for that again. So if I go back to the console, now if I go back to the databases, I can see that I should have a database created here. And this database is the one that I created using the command line. And I created this database from my Nginx server. And this Nginx, the web server, is connecting now to a MySQL backend on Google Cloud Platform, and can create tables, can create databases, can insert data, retrieve data, and so on and so forth. So this way, what we did now is that we created a web server's backend. We connected these to a database like MySQL. We exposed these through our load balancer to the internet where everyone can access it. And we attached some protection to this load balancer, the Cloud Armor WAF service from Google, in order to protect our website from attacks like SQL injection, Log4j, and so on and so forth. So this is I think this is the end. I'm sorry I took 20 minutes extra. I really thank you for putting up with me for 1 hour and 20 minutes. Of course, please keep in mind that there are several ways of deploying web servers on the cloud. It doesn't have to be an infrastructure as a service VM. You can have a container. You can deploy it on Cloud Run or App Engine. There are different options of deploying an SQL backend as well. So the possibilities are limitless. And the situations, the configurations could get a little bit more complicated depending on the requirements of the client or the customer. So if it's an e-commerce website or something else, but this gives you a basic idea of what can be done. I mentioned a couple of best practices that you should keep in mind. I hope this was useful. I hope you benefited from this. I hope I was clear explaining what I wanted to explain. And thank you for having me. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Omar. Hopefully, you're not hearing any kind of echoes at this point.
No,
All
at
good.
this point,
Okay, so
definitely.
thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Omar, I have to say this was a fantastic session. This was gold, actually, because you can see a lot of tutorials out there, but you will never get to see all the different scenarios that you went through. So again, for anyone who's joining us and who's new to cloud, or even for a lot of us who are already deploying applications on the cloud, some of these techniques or practices that Omar did today, especially with Cloud Armor, the load balancer, a lot of those things are clever ways of how you can actually manage your instances. So I think, Omar, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a lot more other sessions planned next month on a weekly basis, as well as we will have Google Cloud uh, experts like Omar joining us for future sessions as well on a monthly basis.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
if you're new to this, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell icon so that you can be updated with that. At the same time, for anyone who's not aware of the GDG Doha community, make sure to hit the link is shown. So go to gdg.community.dev/GDG Doha, and you can actually become a member so that you can stay updated with all the upcoming events. So thank you so much, Omar. So I think we don't have questions. So
Thank you.
a
Thank
lot
you,
of
everyone.
thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you,
Thank you.
Safesh. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone, and see you all in the next one.